Welcome back to my channel. My name is Selenia for those who do not know, and today for you I have a really highly requested video since I've been doing my weekend of life as a new grad NICU nurse, and everybody was wondering how I got my job as a new grad and went straight into the NICU. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to break this video up into two parts. So the first part is going to be all of the exact interview questions that I actually had during my interview to get into the NICU, and then the second part is going to be more of how I got my job, my resume tips, and then other tips and tricks that I can think of that can help new grads get into the field that they want, because sis, you do not always have to go to med surg first. Don't let these nurses fool you or try to discourage you from getting to a specialty that you really want to get into, especially during the times now. So if you're interested in stuff like that, let's get straight into the video. So I decided to break this video up into two parts only because I can talk for hours. So I know that once I start to get talking about these topics, which I'm really passionate about, then the video is going to go on and on and on. So make sure you guys grab a snack, grab a blanket, let's go, let's get into it. But I actually have the exact piece of paper that I used during my interview, because of course during the C word that everybody knows about, we all know, we've been living with it for a year, you have your interviews online. At least that's what I did when I was applying for my nursing jobs. So all of my interviews that I had, they were online. They were through Zooms, Teams, any of that type of stuff. That's how I did my interviews. So I wanted to be as prepared as possible. And a plus with that is that you're in the comfort of your own home or in a comfortable space while you're getting an interview. So like, you could have your cute little suit jacket on with your pajama pants underneath, because no one's going to see that. Of course, I had to dress the best in my home because that's just how I am. That's how I feel good about myself. That's how I get my confidence, is through my outfits pretty much. So that's what I did. But what I decided to do before I get into all these questions, which I have 1, 2, 3, I had about 9 questions. And what I did first is, the first thing that I did was I went online and I looked at commonly asked nurse interview questions. Like, Google's there. I used it. I wanted to be as prepared as possible. So that's what I decided to do. At first, I went to more general questions that I feel like a lot of jobs ask you. And then I went to more specific questions when it comes to working on a neonatal intensive care unit. So that's what I decided to do, because I figured they're going to get a little bit of both, especially you're working as a new nurse, you're working as a nurse, you're going to need to know it all. The second thing that I decided to do is I knew a couple of people that were actually interviewing as well, like me. And if they had their interview before me, I asked them if they wouldn't mind giving me some tips or tricks or anything that they think that I should look out for. Things such as that, questions that they think that were kind of hard for them, that stumped them. And with nursing, a lot of people are super duper helpful. So they totally helped me. They were like, this question really stumped me, so maybe you should look at this and think this through, and things like that. And the third is that I also asked nurses on that unit any advice or any questions or what they were looking for to fill the position, and I answered it truthfully, as well as something that would give me a leg up compared to other people. So with that being said, and my little rant right there on how I got to these questions, I have my NICU interview, as you can see right here. I have all of my questions, in color-coded order, because that's just how I am. And we'll start with the first question. And a lot of the times people ask, why do you want to go into the NICU? Like, why do you want to work with critically ill babies, with families that are having the hardest time of their lives during this time? Why do you want to do that, especially straight out of school? So I made sure that I gave myself plentiful of options based on the person who was interviewing me, as well as how I actually felt that day. Because you want to answer as truthfully as possible, because you want to be honest. Like, you have to keep this up, your personality, the way that you feel throughout your whole job. So why would you lie? That's just how I feel. But what I said is that I wanted to go into the NICU because I actually had clinical on that unit. That was my last clinical site before I graduated my master's program in nursing. So I wanted to go to the NICU because I was lucky enough to actually get into that clinical site. So I definitely tied that into why the NICU, because I was actually blessed to get into that unit, to know that this is something that I wanted to do. And I fell in love with the unit once I finally got onto it. I was excited to go to clinical every day, so I tied back my clinical experience there during school to why I would be great as a nurse there. So why I was excited to go to clinical. During the time, I also wanted to connect what I learned during clinical into how I would be a great NICU nurse, because a lot of people have externships, and I decided not to do an externship during my program. I wanted to focus strictly on school, and I think me being able to have the clinical would set me apart from someone else who has never dealt with neonates before in the NICU. So I said how I dealt with feeder growers, how I dealt with FAS babies, critical babies, using respiratory, cardiac monitoring, things like that. So this nursing manager who interviews me knows that I have seen the NICU before. I know what to expect. I know it's not a daycare. I know exactly how it is. So that's what I also put. I put that I was able to see the whole scope of the practice when it comes to like the women's health area and the pediatric neonate area, because I said you're able to see the scope like the NICU, L&D, transport, you show your critical skills while you're always learning. I wanted to go onto a unit that I wouldn't lose my skills that I learned in school. Like I would learn something in school and never ever see that again. When I'm in the NICU, I learn crucial critical skills. I didn't just want to say the NICU, I wanted to say specifically why I wanted the job at that specific hospital. And for me, it was the environment and how helpful everyone was. So there's that first one. Make sure you keep that in mind if you're applying for a NICU position. So number 2 is I was told by a friend that they were looking for an ethical concern that I've dealt with and how did I handle it. So I'm glad that I got this one, because sometimes this one kind of stumps me, because I'm like, if I would have asked this on the spot, I have to think of an ethical concern, how I handled it. And it doesn't just have to be obviously from you being a registered nurse, because I've only been a student before this. So I try to relate some of that difficulties back to my clinical. And what I decided to do was an ethical concern could be patient privacy of the babies, because when I was in clinical, a lot of the times, a lot of nurses care for those babies and they want to update on them on how they're doing. And as we know, if you're not caring for that baby, don't go into their chart. Even if any regular patient, if you're not caring for that patient, don't get in their chart to be nosy to see an update. Don't see their feeding orders, don't see what types of tubes they have in, don't see the family interactions, none of that. So I feel like that's an ethical concern that I sometimes deal with, because people want updates, especially nursing students are like, oh, I had that baby 3 weeks ago, how's that baby doing? And all of these types of updates, when you can give them to a very minimal way. Like, don't go into super depth detail, don't talk about the parents, don't give any of that type of stuff, which I feel like is hard when it comes to being a nurse, because everybody likes to gossip. Like, I don't understand, but I'm sitting here at work and I'm like, oh, we just talk like that. So that's an ethical concern. That would be the next question, ethical concerns. That one was definitely difficult, tripped me up. So the third one would be strengths that I have as a nurse. And I gave myself a whole list, because we're not going to talk bad about myself. We're going to hype myself up and why I'm great for this position. So I made sure I gave myself multitude of positives, but I didn't overdo it. I just did it for myself to make me feel better, and I picked and choose which ones that I thought were great. So you stop, think about yourself. What are you great at? What sets you apart from everybody else? So what I decided to do was, I don't like when I'm right in front of my front door, so like the mailman can just see me like talking to myself. So yeah, I had to move real quick. Did you see how scared I got? All right. So strengths that I said is that my passion for this population, especially the hospital that I work in, we get a lot of underserved community. So I wanted to make sure I honed in on that. That's the reason why I want to work in this population, not just the babies, but being able to help these families that are underrepresented so commonly in our healthcare in America. So that was one. How I'm a team player, and I feel like that definitely set me apart for this job. Communication, as we kind of just mentioned, being calm under pressure, because a lot of the times you go through some crazy stuff when you're on this unit, and it's important to stay as calm as possible because you have these children's lives in your hands. And number 4, I said that I'm comfortable with Epic, which is important because if that's your charting system, you want to let them know that you're comfortable with that. You know you'll get a class during orientation. However, I want to let you know that I feel good about charting, and because I was able to chart during my clinical, I'm able to chart as a nurse as well. So there's that. Tip number 4, or question number 4, would be weaknesses that I had. So I decided to look online on weaknesses because sometimes it's hard to find something that you feel like is wrong with you or that you need work on. So I always try to turn my negatives into a positive when I do job interviews. I know a lot of people do this, but I personally just think that it's best. I'm not gonna put myself down. And due to me being a new grad nurse, it was kind of easy for me to think of a weakness. And my weakness that I decided to look up was lack of experience as a nurse. That's what I said during my interview. However, right after I said that, I said, but to make up for this incompetency or this weakness, so to say, would be that I have experience on this particular unit as a student. So I wouldn't be starting from zero. I wouldn't be starting from scratch. I'm just starting from me being a new nurse coming straight out of school, and all I know is being a student. However, I'm able to make up that because I've been on this unit before. I feel comfortable. I've been here for 14 weeks, 1 day a week. So I tried to make sure I did that. I didn't really write any more weaknesses because I feel like those I can use for later down the line when I am an experienced nurse. But I just wanted to look at one, and it must have been a good enough answer, girl, because we're here now. Number 5 would be, have you ever had a hard time with the patient? And the way that you think about that would be, you have to go for me based on my clinical experience. Have I ever had a hard time? So I've dealt with adults, because that's what you do during nursing school for majority of your time. You're on a med-surg unit and you deal with adults. So yes, you've had a hard time with some patients. So now you just have to find the best example that will fit this situation without putting down your patient. And you have to talk about when you had a hard time with the patient and how you dealt with it. So you have to deal with it positively. So what I decided to do is I had a baby that had Q2 hours feeds because that's what the providers decided to put them on. That patient was on the same schedule as my other patients. So I didn't do a super hard one with the adults because really, I don't think she really cared about that when I'm telling her. So I decided to deal with the difficult situation that I was in clinical. So both of the patients were on the same schedule, and it was important to complete cares and give a full assessment the times that were necessary. So to fix this, I prioritized this by being ready for the day. I collected all of the supplies that I needed for each patient before that care time, because if they're both due at 2 hours or they're both due around the same time, you get prepared before, get that care time, and then go to the next patient and be on top of it. So make sure your charting's done. Make sure you have the supplies that you need. Make sure and ask for help when necessary. That's why I said that I dealt with these difficult patients, you would say. Because sometimes you are going to get kids that are due at the same exact time. They're gonna need a blood gas at the same exact time, a blood sugar, care time, feed time. They're gonna need an x-ray. X-ray's gonna come up and be like, yeah, we need you to help us and assist with this. Or they're gonna need a UVC, oh, something unexpected, or a lumbar puncture. Something like that is going to happen, so trying to be as prepared as possible is important. The next one would be, which they try to trip you up, if you know what I mean. They ask for a time when you disagree with a nurse or other providers. So, what I decided to do is, someone before when I was in clinical, here's my cat, Bella. Don't you see? Look at the people. You see him? I'm trying to film this video. This is my cat, so I guess my cat's here now. She's getting old, so she needs lots of love, so we're gonna let her be here. So the time that I disagreed with other nurses or providers, when one of the nurses, I asked, why is this patient on a sedation med? When I looked through the chart, didn't understand why. I was asking some more. I was told that we would call the provider and see what was the reason for it, because they couldn't figure it out either, why there was a sedation med, and there was nowhere in the chart explaining it. So the hard time that I had was with another nurse because they never ended up calling, and as a student, you kind of just do what the nurses say. But what I decided to do is I decided to go to my clinical instructor and explain the situation, and because she's a licensed professional as well, she has to figure out the reason for this, and that's how I handled this difficult situation. Is I went to someone higher up, which is good to know, special levels of hierarchy when it comes to your nursing floor. You go to your charge nurse, you go to your nursing manager, you go up and up and up, and that's how you go, but there's levels to it. So for me, during nursing school, my next up would be my nursing instructor, and that's how I dealt with another difficult nurse, because the patient is most important, not hurting another nurse's feelings because they didn't get around to calling the provider for a reason that there's a sedation med. Like a sedation med. But that's besides the point. So there we go with that one. Another one would be, what was a hard time that you had with the coworker? So I had a disagree question, and then I had a hard time question as well. So for my hard time question would be, that the nurse was not as open to me helping on hands, and I just did that as a student because sometimes nurses, especially NICU nurses, they get very protective of their children. Like, they're their children, so they're like, just watch doing this, don't do this on hand stuff, especially when it comes to IVs or drawing up lines or even blood sugars. People get very territorial over the kids that they're caring for. So I said that was a hard time that I had, but I said it's important to work in this environment, and I said, because I just watched as a student, it wasn't as helpful as having that on-hand experience, but I made sure that I went to another person and asked if I was able to help with something, and some nurses are just more receptive than others. So I guess that's one that I decided to say. Next up is questions to ask your nursing manager. So usually this comes at the end of your interview, of course, and it's important when they say, do you have any questions for me, that you ask those questions. This is your time to shine. Set yourself apart from other people. Don't just say, no, I don't have any. Like, come up with something, sis. Come up with something to say that you need to ask. It can be a question you already know the answer to. Just ask the question so it can look good, okay? So a couple of questions that I asked was the turnover rate. What's the turnover rate in your hospital? Am I going to get this job, not like it, and then 6 months down the line, I'm gonna have to go because this environment is toxic, not good for me? That's definitely a good question. What's the turnover rate? And usually they're honest with you. So there's that. What's the culture between days and nights? Because I got hired on as nights. Currently I'm on day shift during orientation, but it's important to know what's the difference in the culture. And then orientation length, how long it's gonna be. I knew it was 16 weeks, but she said it was 16 weeks as well. Turns out mine ended up only being 14 because I'm doing a great job. And then orientation acuity of babies. I talked to my nursing instructor about some questions that I should ask, and she said definitely bring up this. And orientation, I can definitely agree. You start with feeder growers for a few weeks, then you increase in the acuity just like you do as a nursing student. So you start at some easier patients, and then you work up to the more critical patients. I'm already on helping with UVCs, helping with UACs, having babies with IVs, having them on oxygen, having them on CPAP, and I'm about to go to transport for orientation. So we worked our way up from feeder growers all the way to me being about to be on transport, as well as admitting babies into the NICU. So that's just how it works there. And what do you do to support new grads? That was a question that I thought was bing, 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 like the winner. That's the winner. What do you do to support me? Because I'm not only there to provide my time and my resources and my knowledge to you, but how are you going to help me as someone who has never really worked an actual full-time college degree job? And how can I be successful as a new grad? And then another question would be that I actually wrote down that wasn't on this whole list, that wasn't on from the Google questions or the people that I asked, and that would, how do you give family-centered care? So as you know, as a NICU nurse, you're not only caring for these critically ill or sick babies, you're also caring for these families which are having some of the toughest times of their lives, because nobody's like, I'm gonna have a 24-weeker and I'm gonna be in the NICU for 3 months. Like, nobody says that. Nobody says, I'm gonna have a baby that has very low blood glucose levels and we're gonna be here for a long time because they can't eat well. Nobody's going to say that. So what you want to do is you want to be an advocate for those parents, as well as letting them know that their babies and someone that they just birthed or someone that they've been through this whole pregnancy with is safe in your hands when they're not there at the hospital. Because people have things to do. They have jobs to do to support their families. Not everybody gets the super long maternity leave or have the ability to have months and months off of work. Sometimes those moms go back to work like 3 days later. So I think that family-centered care is super important, and what I wrote down is it's important in a lot of specialties, especially the NICU. You include the patient in care, the parent in care as much as possible, and then you also make sure you educate them, especially the family-centered care that I feel like that is the hardest thing, is telling the parents that they're not able to hold their child when they have certain things. Like if they're having a UVC and it's a low-line UVC, you can't really hold your baby because it puts your baby at risk. If your baby needs to be in the incubator because it's not holding its warmth, sometimes certain babies, you're not able to hold those babies. So I think being able to understand their concern, listen to them, answer their questions, as well as let them know that their baby is okay while they're gone, doing what they need to do, providing for their families, is what is most important. And I think that is a good answer to that question. So let's close out this video. I know it was long. I know I rambled a lot, but I really wanted to go in detail about these questions because I get so many questions in the comments about how did I become a NICU nurse? What did they ask you? Things like that. And that's what I hope I gave it to you. Okay, so I want to thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed. I hope you got some knowledge. I hope you wrote down some of these questions. I hope that I answered some of these questions for you. If there's some questions that you still have that you want to know how I would answer them or anything like that, make sure you let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you're on the lookout for part 2 of this video on how I got my job, tips and tricks, as well as some like resume things that I have on there. Because as you can see, this video was already a little bit long and I want to make sure I break it up into enough pieces just so you guys feel like you're getting all the knowledge that you need without me rushing over it. So make sure you let me know other videos down below that you would like to see from me. Make sure you look for a new week in my life that will be coming out probably next week because I'm filming it this week. And like the video, comment down below as I already mentioned, subscribe to my channel because we are slowly growing. Like, we're doing this, okay? I love you guys all so much for showing me all the support, watching my videos, and while you're here, watch another video, why don't you? I'm mostly going to focus on nursing because that's just something that's super passionate to me, but I want to like sprinkle razzle-dazzle a little bit of other videos and content here and there. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, beautiful.